All right, I think we can get started. Yeah, today we're going to talk about how to create an xUnit testing project. We're going to walk through how to set up the test structure, the architecture of the project itself. And then at the end of this, we're going to actually walk through and be able to send an API call and parse through the response that comes back. So the first thing we need to do is create a new project. So we're going to hit create new project. Up here in the search, you can see that I have a previous one that says xUnit test project because I've selected it before. But in the search, you can also do xUnit and it'll show up here. So we're going to choose xUnit test project for C#. And for our project, we're going to call it, we'll just do API test project. We're going to use .NET 6.0. And we have our bare bones of our tests. So there's a couple things that we want to do when we're setting up API tests. We want to, one, set up the structure of our directories. So that way we can keep everything separate and clear and concise. And to do that, we need a couple of different directories. So we need one for the API. We're actually going to be using, I should probably talk about what we're going to be using there, but we're actually going to be using the Brew API. So if we go up to here, go to Brew API, click on Open Brew. Open Brew DB is basically an API that you can query and it will give you data back. So we're going to use this get brewery call. What it does is it supplies us with our URI or our endpoint, and then also supplies us with the response that's expected. Now, this is kind of perfect for what we're going to use. So we're actually going to use this in a second, but I wanted to highlight that. It's also, I'll make sure everybody gets a link for that as well. So the first thing we want to do is that we want to create a directory for our API. So we're going to go to right click on our project and click add new folder. And I'm going to call this, let's call it a brew API. Actually, we'll do brewery API since that's what it is. And inside there, I want to create one more folder. And I'm going to right click on the brew API folder, click new folder. I'm going to create one called response. Now, this is going to house all of our response models from the API. And we're going to show that in a second here, but I just want to kind of explain what that is. All right. So we kind of have this default test here. That's okay. We can keep that for now. We're going to modify that in a second. I talked a little bit about response models, and basically what a response model is the structure of the response coming back. So it tells you if it, if a parameter is integer or string or a bool or Boolean, and it kind of lets us map the response that we get back to a specific structure. Now, it can be kind of time consuming to have to create this on your own. Visual Studio actually provides a really great, specifically Visual Studio for Windows, provides a great opportunity for doing this automatically, right? So it offers a functionality called paste special, and that's what we're going to use now. So we're going to go to the Brew API. We're going to look at, again, I'm in Get Brewery. I'm going to highlight all of this. This is the response, the output that we're expecting. So I'm going to copy that. Don't worry about the information that's in there. That's not going to copy over here in a second. We're going to go back to our Visual Studio. And then we're going to simply right click on response, click add new item. And I'm going to call this brewery API and then underscore response. Now that's going to create some default boilerplate information for us. I don't really care about it. I'm actually going to delete that internal class that's created automatically. And with my cursor selected inside the brackets, I'm going to go up to edit, go down to paste special. So as you'll notice, there's two of them. There's paste and there's paste special. Paste special is really what the magic comes from when we're trying to grab a response model. So I'm going to do paste JSON as classes. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to take the structure from that response or that expected output and set it up really nice for us. So that way we have our structures. So by default, it actually sets the class name to root object. So we're going to actually change that to get brewery. And I'm going to add response to the end of that. So I am aware, because sometimes when you're working with these, you can also do request models as well. Works the exact same way, except for it would be in a request directory under request class. So you don't want to mix up a get brewery request with a get brewery response. For us, we don't really need a request model for this because get brewery doesn't require that type of data structure to be sent. But just keep that in mind. So right now we're actually done with our response model already. So now we have our response model that we can utilize to come when we go to send out a request and we get a response back, we have something to deserialize that response against. All right, the next piece that we do, we need to actually create our class for our brewery API service. So I'm going to right click on the brewery API directory, click add new item. And then I'm going to create a class called brewery API. And this is where it's going to house all of our requests and calls that we would send to the API. So if we were to instantiate this in a test, this is the class that we would need to instantiate. I'm going to change this internal class to a public. And excuse me, and inside of that class, we will want to start setting up our HTTP client. So we're going to be using HTTP client and async calls to send our requests to the endpoint. So the first thing we do is we'll set up our HTTP client instance. So we'll do private HTTP client. Now I don't have it set up yet, so I'm gonna once the squiggly lines comes up, I'm gonna go to quick actions and I'm going to go use system using system.net.http and we'll call this REST client, and we'll do equals new HTTP client, and then we'll do a private string URI equals, and then this is where we actually need our string for our base URI. So wherever your endpoint is coming from, so your API could be, you know, whatever your local API is where you put your URI. URI is basically the URL to where you're trying to hit for your API. If I go back to the brewery DB, I will see that my URI is right here. Now, please take note that we have there's a base URI, right? We have the open or the api.openbrewerydb.org/breweries. And then we have an actual parameter here that actually differentiates the response that's coming back. So I just for the URI want my base URI first. So I'm going to copy that and bring it into Visual Studio here. And we'll paste that right there. If I can find paste. Next, we're going to add a private string for our brewery, right? We want to pass in our brewery. And we're going to just simply pass in the parameter that was after our base URI. So this is the parameter that actually differentiates which brewery information comes back. So we're going to do that here. Okay, so now we have basically the core of our API information that we require to be able to send information, specifically a GET call. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a method, a public async method actually to perform our get call for us and return the response. So I'm going to start with saying a public async task. And then if you remember, we created a response, right? So we did brew, what do we call our response? I don't remember. Let's go back. Get brewery response. And what I'm doing here is basically I want to pass in the response that we're expecting to come back. Oops, just selected there. There we go. And it's going to complain because it doesn't know, I'm not including it yet. So if it complains, I'm basically going to go to quick actions, and then it's going to ask me to add the naming space for our responses, which is API test project.brewery API.response. So that's going to add it up here. And then after that, we're going to actually call our method name. So we're going to say get underscore brewery, right? And then set up for our let's start writing our async method here. So the first thing I want to use is a URI builder. So the URI builder is basically how you can construct a URI to be sent into sent a request sent. Sorry. Basically, that means that like if I have not just a string parameter, or I have to like serialize some stuff into JSON, I can build it into a URI builder or pass it into a URI builder. And using that method, I can do things outside of that, right? So I can just construct my own version of what I want to pass as my URI. It's kind of very unique to that. So I actually like, by default, it tried to call it URI builder, which is fine, but I like to call it builder. And then for what I'm going to pass in here, I'm actually going to pass in a string here. So I'm going to do $, so I can add in a little bit more control on my parameters here. So we're going to call URI. So right now, if I were to just keep it that, my URI would just be this. But I actually want the brewery as well, right? So we're going to do brewery after that. And now we've started to construct our URI. This is the actual endpoint that we're going to call. The next step I'm going to do is set up a variable for our response. So this is going to be the actual REST client call. So Visual Studio 2022 does an excellent job of trying to guess what I'm typing here. So we do await REST client dot get async, and then we pass in our builder.uri. Okay. Next, we're going to do our context, right? So we want to, after we get a response back, we want to see the context, and we want to read it as a string from async. So we're going to do var context equals await. And then again, it guesses what I'm going to do, but this time I'll type it out. So the response dot content dot read async. And again, we're going to do something with that context here in a second. Let me make sure I got everything good here. Yep. All right. So now we're going to go into a try statement. So basically, we're going to try something. And what we're going to try is we're going to try to deserialize our response using that response model that we created. So I'm going to do a var, call it response model. Oops, model, and equals. And then I'm going to use JSON convert. Again, it's going to complain that I don't have it, so I'm going to highlight it. Sorry there. Oh, I spelled it wrong. That's why I didn't try to guess. So JSON convert, and then go to quick options. We'll add newtonsoft.json. After that, we're going to do deserialize object. And inside that, we're going to pass in get brewery response, and then pass in our context. So get brewery response, pass in our context. And after that, we're just simply going to return our response model, because we want to know, we want that to be returned back to the test so we can do our validations against it. Next, we'll do catch, and we'll do If that doesn't work, I want to make sure we return something. Oops. So we'll do no. So this is basically our API method, right? We do have a lot of unnecessary stuff up here, so we can remove all the unnecessary using so it doesn't confuse anybody. But this is the core of the service that we're going to be calling, the instance of the API that we'll call from our tests. So now we have an opportunity to go check out our tests, right? So in Visual Studio, or I'm sorry, in xUnit, it differs from the more familiar, those familiar with in-unit, because it utilizes different attributes, right? So in unit, we have our test methods and our categories. In xUnit, tests to attributes are called fact or theory. We'll talk about theory in a minute, but theory is basically a test method, but with data. And then we have our inline data, which is where our data feeds into for theory. And then we have our traits, which is where we can set our categories. So we're going to touch on those 3 attributes specifically, those 4 attributes actually, sorry about that. Okay, so let's kind of mutilate this into what we want it to be. So because our API get call is an async function, we need to have our public, our test method an async. So we're going to do public async. And then we're going to call this get brewery oops, info, because that's what's going to return is basic info. And then inside of that test method, we're going to create an instance of our API, right? So we'll do brewery API, brewery API. So again, it's going to complain, can't find brewery API. So we're going to pull in that using statement for it. I think we called it brewery API, right? Let's see. Let's see if I mess up here. What if it's because I am silly and created all that? Right. That was definitely it. All right, so the problem there was that I accidentally named my directory brewery API. Now, the problem with that is that my namespace then by default was the same as the class for my brewery API. So it was confused when I was trying to call my namespace for the brewery API. That is a fairly silly mistake on my part. So anyway, so to fix that again, I had to change my directory, right click, rename it to brewery. Then I had to go to my brewery response, change my naming space to brewery here from brewery API. And then inside my brewery API, I needed to update my namespace here to brewery and my response namespace here to brewery. So I apologize for that confusion, but it was kind of nice to troubleshoot live here. But yeah, so now our pub class brewery API does not match, then is not in sync with the same naming space. We've updated that and fixed it. Back to the test. So we created we instantiated our API, our brewery API's API. So the next move we need to do is create our response, right? So we're gonna do our call. We'll say response equals await, and then we'll do API dot, and then we'll look for our get brewery call, which is right here. We don't have any parameters to pass to it at this time. So we'll just end it right there. And then we will do assert dot equal, and we'll actually assert on the city name. So I know that we're going to be hitting Cincinnati, so we'll do our assert on Cincinnati. And then we'll basically just take our response that we have, and our response now takes our response model because our Git brewery is using that as its deserialization. So we'll do response dot, and we'll look up city. So now we're going to do our call to our brewery, and we're going to basically assert on the response back from the city. So once we get that response back from the city, we can assert on that. And sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. So yeah, basically we're going to get our assert dot equal. We're going to validate that the city that's coming back with the response is the city that we expected. So I will actually save here, and we're going to do build solution so we can build our tests. Now I actually don't have my test explorer open, so I'm going to go up to test explorer, open that up. I do not want that there, so I'm going to drag it down into here. Actually, I want to drag it down into, sorry about that. I'm going to drag it down into here, so it's not so hard to figure out. And as you can see, we have our unit test in here. If we want to, we could rename our class into something meaningful. So we could say brewery tests, and then we'll save that. And I'll actually rename this as well to brewery tests. So brewery tests. So that way it shows up down here and it's not confusing when we look at it. Now, if we expand it all the way down, we'll notice that we have our Git brewery info test. I'll simply first just run it, and then we can kind of see if it passes or if there's any issues with it. And it did pass quickly. So we'll go to, if we want to actually see the response before it goes, we can, like before it finishes, we can put a breakpoint in at the return response model. And what that'll do is it'll stop it right after we've deserialized it into our response model. And we will be able to view what the response is. So let's do that. So I'm going to right click on the test, debug. It's going to run. All right. And then under here, let's do locals. We'll look at the response model. That is our variable. And as you can see, all of our responses have been mapped properly. So all the responses that came back from the test, if we go back here, we can look at our output, have been properly mapped to our response model that we set. So we'll continue that, complete it. And that's how you set up a basic test using the fact setup here.